Hi, Madonna Louise Veronica Ciccone here.
When will you understand that I am a person and not a thing?
Look it up.
Do something else. Do my eyebrows.
Better to say, am I being true to myself? And is this what I want to say? And have I expressed myself the way I want to express myself? I mean, that's what it's all about.
Hey everyone, this is Lucy O'Brien, and you're listening to MLVC, the Madonna podcast.
Hey guys, it's Tony, and I am sorry to say that August is like the Sunday of summer, right?
Yes, true. I know. We're going to hold on to summer as long as we can. Hey everybody, it's Stefan. Welcome to another episode of MLVC, the Madonna podcast, your place for all things Madonna Louise Veronica Ciccone. And today on the show, we are so happy to welcome author Lucy O'Brien to the podcast. Welcome, Lucy.
Hello.
Welcome, Lucy.
Hi. I'm really pleased to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
Well, we're so happy to have you. How is everything going in London these days?
Well, we had quote unquote Freedom Day last month. We were very nervous about what that might mean and whether there might be a sudden rise in infection rates. But so far, it doesn't seem too bad, thank goodness. And I think that's probably because a large proportion of us have had our double jabs.
Good.
Right down to my son, who is 19 years old and is very proudly going for his second vaccine. So,
Oh, very good.
yeah,
good.
yeah. So that has helped kind of opening things up. Definitely.
Just in time for all of the restrictions, I saw that London has opened its doors, that we can now come and we don't have to quarantine if we want to visit Big Ben.
Yeah, you
Yes.
can come and see Big Ben, and you can wander along the South Bank, and you can sit in a pub, and all those things that we like to do. Yeah,
We're gonna. I think I want to stalk Imelda Stanton on the set of The Crown.
She's great.
Yes, aren't they filming the next series at the moment? Yeah. No, I absolutely love that show. I mean, we watch it religiously. It's so good, and it makes me laugh when the producers say, "Oh, well, it's just kind of dramatized fiction," and you think it's not really, is it?
No.
They just say that to protect the royals.
Of course. But it's kind of wicked, but it's really well observed. And, it's actually an old friend of mine from university, Peter, who actually writes the script.
Oh, wow.
Nice.
I think, he's very down to earth, and I can imagine him taking that view when he was working on the script, is let's make these people human. Let's make them relatable. And that's how it really works. Yeah.
Well, before we go any further, I'm going to give Lucy a proper introduction, if you don't mind. All right. Dr. Lucy O'Brien is a writer, academic, and broadcaster. She's the author of Madonna Like an Icon, which has been translated into 13 languages and just recently was published with an update. Dusty, the classic biography about Dusty Springfield, also is one of her works. In 2020, she co-authored the Amazon bestseller, It Takes Blood and Guts with Skin from Skunk Anansi, and I need to get myself a copy of that because I love them. And she also published a special 25th anniversary edition of her book, Shebop, The Definitive History of Women in Popular Music. She's currently working on a major biography of Karen Carpenter, which is out in 2023, and we can't wait for that. I
cannot wait for that.
Ooh, yes, that's
Also, she's the course leader for MA Music Industry Management and Artist Development at the University of West London, so she will school you. And she also writes for numerous titles, including Mojo, The Sunday Times, and The Guardian, and countless publications. Welcome, Lucy.
Welcome. Yeah, I know. Before we dive into Madonna, I just have to say, Tony and I were like salivating over the fact that you were writing about Karen Carpenter. Like, love Karen Carpenter. It's just such a gone too soon.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I really wanted to celebrate her life. The dominant narrative for so long has portrayed her as a very, very sad victim. And while, that's absolutely true, and I want to look at, mental health issues and eating disorders, I also want to look at what she achieved as a musician and as a fantastic drummer, and her vocal expertise. And I also want to do kind of what I've done with Dusty and also with Madonna, like be almost fly on the wall in the studio and get a sense of how did she work, day to day. Because she was involved in the arrangements and the production, even though Richard is given so much credit. She did an awful lot as well. She was there 24/7 with him. So that's what I'm kind of exploring right now.
That's your sneak peek, listeners. That's your what's forthcoming.
That's an exclusive, actually. Yeah.
No, that's great, and I know that Karen Carpenter has been very influential to a lot of vocalists working today, including Madonna. I mean, you can hear that influence in many of her ballads, and the biggest standout for me would be Rain. When the first time I heard Rain, I was like, oh my God, she's been listening to the Carpenters.
Yeah.
Oh, see, I always thought the most recent Madonna song that would be compared to Karen Carpenter would be Madonna's Ghost Town. When I heard Ghost Town for the first time, I was like, this is Karen Carpenter. Like, this is how Karen, like, if you put Karen Carpenter's voice on Ghost Town, I mean, it would be the same thing. It's
that intense melody. And I've always thought Madonna has a real gift for melody, similar to Karen Carpenter, very pure sensibility, and also a way of, Madonna has a fantastic way with humming, and that was one of Karen Carpenter, creating this real smooth, kind of quite resonant sound, and also real clarity. And I think Madonna has said that she was inspired by Karen Carpenter in the way that she sang.
Yeah, there's an interesting pairing if you want to take a listen. And the Carpenters had an album in 1978 called Passage, and they covered Don't Cry For Me, Argentina. So listen to that and listen to Madonna's version, and you'll see how it's more similar than not.
Interesting.
Wow.
See, Lucy, even I learned things on this podcast.
You see, immediately we've finished, I'm going to go and run and look that up. And
just for the record, Passage is my favorite. It's my favorite Carpenters album. It's very experimental. That's where they did the Calling Occupants, among other songs.
Too. I think they were going into really interesting territory there. Really interesting territory. And actually, I'm giving away little secrets here, but Karen was actually instinctively more of an experimentalist than Richard. And there's a few nice little stories I've been uncovering about. She had quite a conceptual approach to the music, and had she survived, I think she would have gone on to explore that a lot more, and as a solo artist too.
Yeah. Oh wow. Well, we could talk about Karen Carpenter for the rest of my life, but let's talk about the lady of the moment, Madonna. Lucy, you wrote the definitive biography about Miss Ciccone titled Madonna Like an Icon. It explores the complex personality, the legendary drive that has made Madonna the most famous female pop artist of our time. What motivated you to begin this process?
Gosh, well, it kind of goes back to about 2007. She was approaching her 50th birthday, and I thought, actually, this is a good time to really properly give her the biography she deserves. I'd always been a Madonna fan, right from the early 80s when she first emerged. And I'd always followed her career. I'd always gone to her concerts, always listened to the albums, took note of the videos. And I was just kind of waiting for the right time, really. And I felt that all the biographies up to that point had really focused on the more sensational aspects of her life and her career and her relationships and sex and drama.
Scandal.
And I felt that had been kind of covered and over-covered, if you like. And I really wanted to know that I had questions as a music writer. I really want to know about her as a musician and an artist, because she has fantastic albums, a real strong narrative arc to each album, along with the whole visual concept. And people wrote her off and as someone with medium talent. Was it, the famous phrase "Minnie Mouse on helium"? I thought that was just really disparaging, and I thought, no, actually, there's a lot more to her, and I really want to do this. It's something I love, for me, it's the equivalent of being nosy and looking in people's front windows. Is I like to get into the studio and kind of be like a fly on the wall. So I talk to musicians and producers and collaborators and get a real sense of. I did it with Dusty, did it with Annie Lennox, and I took the same approach with Madonna. I talked to people on all of those albums, and like take me through the sessions. What was it like? What was she like? And the same with the shows, talking to choreographers, talking to dancers, how did she rehearse? How did she come up with the ideas? And then piece by piece, you're kind of building this picture, this kind of mosaic of who the real working artist is, behind this amazing work.
Yeah, it's funny you put it together and you say it like that. That's sort of how Tony and I feel what we're doing with the podcast. When we had started the podcast, we thought, okay, let's talk about her. But then at the same time, we thought, well, there's all these people who have been involved with her career throughout the years who have helped make the behemoth known as Madonna. And we thought, well, wouldn't it be fun to sort of share their stories here from those people who work directly with her on these shows or on these videos, make these productions that have become such indelible parts of fans' lives. And you sort of get background on Madonna and what her artistic process is like by hearing their stories. And I think that's, why we find it so fascinating to invite people on the show.
It's interesting. As you say it, I'm kind of thinking, you're in New York, aren't you? So I'm thinking, one of her big influences was Andy Warhol and the factory and the way he used pop art. And she's kind of called herself, a pop artist, or, she's kind of she says she's sort of doing installations. And a lot of the people she hung out with in New York in the early days were artists and as well as musicians. And I think she takes that approach to her work, kind of like, similar to the way Warhol did with the factory, is like gathering creative people from different, whether it's from film or whether it's from music or club nights, dance, and quite Magpie-like, just sort of assembling it all together with her own vision. I think people say she relies a lot on other people, but I think what she does is she synthesizes it all. And after all, that's what an artist does.
Yeah. No, I totally agree with that because, Andy Warhol famously created, and this word is in quotes, superstars, just literally by looking at them and saying, you're a superstar. But I think in Madonna's Circle, in her orbit, she had these incredibly talented artists of every discipline, and I'm thinking Debbie Mazar, Shep Pettibone, William Orbit, all these people that, had their own thing going, but because they circulated in her orbit, suddenly they became superstars, right?
Yes, yes, absolutely, definitely.
And so in your book, I love that you organized the biography into 3 sections, baptism, confession, and absolution. So what about Madonna's life prompted you to organize the book that way? I was,
So
because I thought it was a very Madonna way of organizing a book about her,
Yes. It's kind of tongue-in-cheek because she's very tongue-in-cheek. And it was my lovely husband, Malcolm, who actually helped me come up with the title Like an Icon, because I thought, you've got, like a virgin, like a prayer, like an icon. And then, it's kind of tickled me because I was brought up a good Irish Catholic girl and went to a convent school. So I get a lot of her imagery and her metaphor, and it just felt right because she actually draws on a lot of Catholic liturgy and language in her work. So I just thought baptism, that's when you're given admission into the church. And I think in a way this is her being admitted into the music industry, those early chapters, that time in New York, and then those early albums. And then the section Confession was really where she was exploring that dichotomy between saint and sinner, virgin and whore, and how she was getting punished really for being so outspoken in terms of her sexuality, and also in supporting LGBT sexuality as well, being really open about that before a lot of artists were brave enough to do that.
Sure.
And then the final section, Absolution, kind of with Ray of Light, there was a sense of transcendence, and then motherhood and shifting of priorities and kind of changing her focus. So there was a sense that she'd been absolved of her sins because she got married and she had a child, and but then, as we all know, she went into another phase, which is the last phase that I call redemption, where she kind of redeemed herself for herself in all kinds of ways. Really, is quite a powerful. Not just as an artist, but also someone really active and pushing for social change in quite an explicit way.
So, as Stefan brought up earlier, there are other works about Madonna out there, famously Andrew Morton, Randy Taraborelli. But I do feel like, as you brought up earlier as well, that this is, your work is more about the process and how Madonna, starts an era or a phase or a look, and then takes it to its natural conclusion. And that's what I want. That's what I always wanted to read. I wasn't really interested in whether she was dating Jimmy Albright, the bodyguard. You know what I mean? It's that's neither here nor there. I want to know how Madonna comes up with these melodies and her process in the studio. So do you think that, obviously this is like a social construct, but do you think that because she's a woman, she's not given enough credit as a creator, as a viable collaborator, as an icon?
And that was something I was continually discovering as I was doing my research. So one of the first interviews I did, it was with a producer that she worked with right back in the days before she got signed, and he said, he absolutely confirmed for me, she's a musician. She did a demo tape, and he said she played all the instruments herself. She did all the arrangements herself. She wrote the songs herself. She locked herself in the studio, and she just did that, over a week. And then so many people corroborated that. They weren't just being nice. I could tell. These are professionals who have got their relationships and their reputation on the line. So someone like Andre Crouch, who the gospel choir that sang with her on Like a Prayer, he said, he talked to me quite specifically about it. We sat down and we went through all the bars, and she knew, she said, wait, can we go back to bar 22 where the rhythm goes like this? And she had a very, very precise instructions, and she knew exactly where everything was. Guy Pratt, who played bass in the sessions, the Like a Prayer session, said a similar thing. She really had a handle on every single instrument and who was playing what, and gave people very precise instructions. So, when there is that co-producer credit, that's a proper co-producer credit. She's not just something that they all said is that she's very good with melody lines, and she'll come up with these really good melody lines that might appear quite simple, but then when they're put in the whole pop production, they work brilliantly. But also, and I think because she's a dancer, she's got that, really impeccable rhythm and timing. And I think that's what Andre Crouch was referring to when he was talking about, her sense of the bars and the time and the rhythm. So, yes, that was something that I kept coming up with and coming up against, or well, not against. It was a real plus. And I mean, I have to say, even I, as a music writer and someone who's worked a long time in the music press, a lot of us didn't even know that ourselves. It was as if there'd been this slight conspiracy, or maybe just carelessness to not explore that, not investigate that, not kind of give her that credit, and just sort of talk about her as if it was all the producer's work and not really her contribution.
Yeah, I mean, I think not that she did herself a disservice at the very first MTV Video Music Awards, but I think when you roll yourself around on the floor in a wedding dress in front of a Radio City Music Hall audience, people are going to look at that and say she has no talent, because in their minds at that time, and probably still today, if a woman is going to roll around on a stage, they think she doesn't have talent, because the only thing that she has talent doing is selling her body. And so I think even if she was completely musically talented, if she's not out there playing a guitar or strumming on, like playing drums, she's not going to look like she's a credible musician. And
I think, it's interesting, talking to people, she's actually quite insecure about her musical talent because she didn't have that traditional music training. She had the traditional dancers training, so she's really confident about her dance and the language of dance and the way she expresses herself. But in terms of music, she didn't really have, like here in the UK, we go through our grades. We do grade 1 up to grade 9, and then you're like a proper musician. And I think there's part of her deep down, maybe she's got a bit of a sense of imposter syndrome, and that's why she doesn't foreground the musicianship in interviews. So what's quite interesting is that musicians and producers do that for her and actually say, I talked to Pat Leonard, who said that absolutely she was as much the architect of the Like a Prayer album. It was very much a close collaboration between them. So I do find that very interesting.
Yeah, that reminds me of when she first came on David Letterman and performed, and she played the guitar for the first time. And
with Don't Tell Me, I was in the audience for that.
Excuse me, Stefan. Excuse me.
It's one of my favorite. It's one of my favorite in-person Madonna moments. I remember when she was playing guitar for that, and I thought, I love that this is the first time she's publicly playing guitar, and I get to be here. And I mean, go ahead, Tony. I know you're going to say how nervous she was.
Yeah, I was noticing. She was equal parts nervous, but equal parts so proud. And I remember specifically that moment because I was like, Madonna's showing us how she is playing the guitar, and it's really coming from her heart. But you can also see her hands shaking, and I love those moments of vulnerability because she doesn't want you to see that.
Yeah. No, but again, that's what I enjoy about her is she is a flesh and blood woman. And you really get a sense of her strength, and a slight messiness about her person. And that was another thing I found. When I was doing the book, I was constantly getting these little surprises, like her first manager Camille Barbone saying how absolutely chaotic Madonna was in those early days, and you kind of see her as this person who's so together and always so in control and. It got control. That's the word everyone uses, and yet actually in those early days she really wasn't. It was real. Yeah. And Camille was kind of like a mother figure, and they used to call her the kid. It's like, what time is the kid coming home, and is the kid hungry? And and she was, and sleeping on people's floors. And, it wasn't just Camille who said that. There were a few friends and management figures from that time who said, she did need structure, and she was looking for friends, and she was looking for people to kind of support her. She did need a lot of support in those days.
Yeah. So, Lucy, tell us about the newly updated edition of Like an Icon. I have the updated edition from 2018, but this is the one that was released by Day Street Books last September. Can you, tell us, us readers of the first edition, what can we expect in this updated tome, and where and in what formats may we find it? And yeah, just tell us what points of Madonna's recent life did you choose to focus on?
So, I was kind of filling in. It was filling in those 10 years between her 50th and her 60th birthday, basically. Mm-hmm. And she went through such intense change through that time. Mm-hmm. So much so that one thing that really struck me, because this is kind of written from a feminist viewpoint, and what I've always liked about Madonna is she's never denied that she's a feminist. You know how some female artists get a bit mealy-mouthed and a bit, I wouldn't use the word feminist, and Madonna's always been quite ballsy about that, and she's no, I'm a strong woman, and this is what I think, and there was a real turning point. I think it was 2016, the Billboard Women of the Year Awards.
She called herself a bad feminist. Yeah.
Well, she kind of, she anticipated that #MeToo movement when she said, I stand before you as a doormat. And you think, oh my God. And we're all like really shocked because we thought it would be... Again, it goes back to this idea of control. She was always so famously in control. And then she said in that speech, she just debunked all those myths and said, well, actually, it was really, really hard. And it was a real struggle, and it still is. And laying out it quite raw, this is why it was a struggle, and this is why there are double standards, and there's a game for women and there's a game for men. Mm-hmm. And she just really laid it out. And I suppose for me that was the fulcrum around that final section when I was updating the book is kind of looking at that and really how she'd developed as a woman, really stepping into. I mean, she always was powerful as a cultural figure. But I got the feeling in those 10 years between her 50th birthday and her 60th birthday, it's like she finally really believed it, that there was no longer that imposter syndrome. She sort of stepped into who she was. Yes, I am an artist, actually, and this is my contribution. This is what I've done. And I'm actually really proud of it. And there was a sense of her kind of settling into herself and what she stands for and what she's fighting for, really. That came out very strongly too. Mm-hmm. So those are all the things I put in, and then also looking at her relationship with her family and her children. And when I was updating it, she was going through that difficult time with Rocco, so kind of looking at the impact of that. And also her adoptions and her relationship with Malawi, and kind of moving into just a new phase of her life and moving to Portugal as well, and kind of moving back to Europe, really, and that European sensibility.
No, I love that. And your book succeeds in showing us what Madonna was like when she was an intrepid young woman and artist, in New York City. This is my favorite part of the story because there's so many layers to it. I mean, and in your book, they're through first-person accounts and your meticulous research, it just really takes you there and puts you in that time and space. You mentioned, a few minutes ago that, one revelation that you didn't see coming was that, when Camille shared with you that Madonna was kind of messy at first. Is there anything else surprising about Madonna that during your sleuthing, you kind of just came across and just couldn't believe it?
Well, one thing, I really enjoyed, because I spent, because it's funny, isn't it? It's almost like before lockdown and after lockdown, pre-pandemic and after pandemic, but this is going back a little bit. I spent some time in Detroit, in New York, and in LA. There's no substitute. When you're a biographer, I really think it's important to go to the actual locations and spend time there and talk to people. And that was one of the most interesting points, was when I was in Detroit and I went to Rochester, the suburb where she grew up, and spent some time. I was lucky enough to hang out with an old school friend of hers who sort of took me around all the old haunts, and, including parties. Oh yeah, well, we had a beer keg party over there, and really terrible American accent, but and also going to the football pitch where she used to be a cheerleader. The high school, seeing the Catholic church that she used to go to, and then meeting one of her old boyfriends, Win Cooper. And this was one of the most surprising things, was because I said, gosh, she was such an alpha female, wasn't she? And he was like, well, no, actually, in lots of ways, she was really quite serious and quiet, and quite bookish. What, you're joking? But then I thought, in a way it makes sense, is that there is a lot of shininess on the surface, but actually, if you think about it, a lot of her concepts are they're deeply thought through, aren't they? Whether it's Blonde Ambition or whether it's the cowgirl in music, or each album has layers, layers upon layers, and that comes from time spent thinking, reading, researching, looking at art, thinking about ideas, looking at films. That doesn't happen by accident. So going back to when she was a teenager, she was doing a lot of that even then, her own research, and it was almost like she was quietly storing away all this information about what she wanted to be and do before she kind of let it loose on New York.
Yeah,
but that really surprised me.
I always think about Madonna's teenage years when she snuck out of the house to go see David Bowie in Detroit. Like, I can only imagine what was going through her mind and how she took this all in. And like you said, taking notes, and then storing it away for later. Yeah.
A quick study, as Camille called her. Yeah.
So Lucy, I do want to ask you about your research. Speaking of research, I want to ask you about yours. But before that, I just wanted to say, do you think that you will do another update of the book in another 10 years? Because I know, harkening back to what we were applauding The Crown, I know that people are wondering if there will be future seasons of The Crown, and Peter Morgan had said he would have to be at least 10 years away from something like Meghan Markle and Harry,
yes,
in order to sort of see the arc of that story properly. He has specifically said anything from past is good because he can see the story a little bit clearer. Do you agree with that? Would that be the same thing with Madonna? Maybe by the time she turns 70, you'd be able to see her 60s a little bit easier.
Absolutely. I would totally agree with him there. And I'm a great believer in keeping books alive if they have a life and validity. And, the reason to do that with Madonna is because she never sits still. She's always working. She's always creating something. And, there wouldn't really be a point if she's retired, but I can't see her ever retiring, to be honest.
No.
Yeah, something tells me she's going to keep going.
Yeah, or she'll always do something cultural and something interesting. She's always looking for the interesting ideas and what's happening in art, in terms of change. She loves being on that cutting edge there and seeking people out who are on that cutting edge.
Yeah, I mean, there's, I specifically think about the careers of Tina Turner and Cher, specifically in, between their 60s and 70s. And there is a lot that Madonna can mine out of this decade, and
yes. And, it was funny, I went to see Madame X at the Palladium. It's one of those lovely old theatres, London theatres. And it was actually really funny and quite sweet, and you're right there, it's not that big. So we were sort of sat and she was right there. And she was quite sweet, that was when she had the problems with her knees. And and she did a few songs and then she said, "Oh, could someone hand me a chair? I need to sit down."
Yes.
So she plonks herself down on this chair and I'm just going to talk to you for a while. And it was like a different Madonna, it was so different from, say, back to Blonde Ambition Tour or the Girly Show. But that's what I like about the way she evolves. And she's not feeling, you could tell that she felt comfortable with where she was. She wasn't trying to be, unjustly, I think people have said, "Oh, she's not growing old gracefully and she should, she's trying to be young the whole time." But I don't think she is. I really don't think she is. She for that show, she was drawing on those kind of Portuguese fado influences. She was drawing on kind of global beats. She had a very different kind of theatrical presentation. And some really beautiful bits like that portrayal of Frozen where it's got Lola just kind of like, she's like the bindi in Lola's forehead. It's an amazing show. So I'm kind of digressing a bit, but I think weren't we sort of thinking about how she stays relevant and she's still doing really interesting work.
Well, I'm curious as to what sort of goes into your researching for someone like such a public figure as Madonna. Obviously, there's Wikipedia, there's multiple blog articles and journalist articles. And did you find that there was stuff that wasn't readily available online? Was there a significant dead end in some stories that you were trying to track down?
So I think my way round a lot of this is, yes, you can get some really, really interesting stuff on the internet. And I'm finding that with my Karen Carpenter research, but I won't say anything about that at the moment. No. But you can, and you can find things that obscure radio interviews. Radio is great because, when artists are on tour, quite frequently they'll talk to a local radio station and that might not see the light of day, after it's been broadcast. And that's what I've been doing with Karen Carpenter. And, and I have found with Madonna, like little known obscure interviews she might have done in Toronto or for a small paper. But actually where I found the most interesting stuff was in the face-to-face interviews. And you've probably found that with the podcast, is there's no substitute for a proper conversation. And that was always my priority. And it's always been my priority as a journalist, is that's actually how you do research and how you find new information is in conversations with people. And quality time, not just email questions, but actually quality time either via, then it was more Skype when I was doing it, or literally just being, traveling over there and spending time in Detroit and in Michigan and meeting old school friends from University of Michigan, for instance. And just by asking questions, like her ex-boyfriend, Wynn, and asking questions like, well, so what was it like? What would you actually do? And he gave me painted this lovely picture of them riding around in his car, listening to Ziggy Stardust and smoking a bit of weed. And I thought, whoa,
Madonna.
Oh, whoa.
So this is an entirely selfish question. You've lived in London for a long time, and how surprised were you when Madonna decided to move to London? This happened after Ray of Light. I guess she fell in love with it while she fell in love with a man too before Guy Ritchie, and she just stayed for a bit.
It didn't surprise me because London was going through a really, that was around the Cool Britannia time when London was going through a real renaissance, and there was so much going on, good music, good film, good art, and it kind of chimes with where she was in her interests, and obviously working with William Orbit on Ray of Light would have opened up that whole kind of network of producers and kind of thinking about that production, and she ended up in London. I think she's always had an Anglophile side to her.
Yeah.
And it kind of made me laugh a bit when she became the lady of the manor, when she married Guy Ritchie. And it always felt a little bit like The Crown, that she was living a fantasy life there out in Wiltshire. And that was a nice afternoon. I went with a friend of mine who lives in the area, and we actually travelled and went to Ashcombe House. We went as near to it as we could, and we were in the grounds. We were a bit naughty. We were we actually went past all these little what do you call it, where you keep pheasants, and there were all these pheasants kind of being kept, obviously where Guy the game for the shooting, and that was really interesting, getting a sense of that part of her life as well. I think there was something that appealed to her about that Englishness, that sort of traditional Englishness. It's so different, really, from America, isn't it? That kind of
absolutely. I mean, if you look at her country home in New York as opposed to her country estate in England, it's two separate worlds, and And I do remember, the photo spread that was in Vogue, and, the Cecil Beaton style photos. And I thought, well, this is almost like a fantasy that most Americans have, and she kind of made it happen,
Yeah, she did country living and all that. Yeah. I think here we took it with a pinch of salt, because it did read a bit like an American's idea of what Englishness is, and sort of conveniently ignored the way the class system operates here.
Right.
It's grated with a lot of people, and I think people weren't that sure about Guy Ritchie. So it did seem like a temporary thing. So that to be honest, I wasn't that surprised when she moved back to New York, and like, oh my God, I need to go back home.
Yeah, she wanted to dip her toes in a little sticky toffee pudding, and then have her way back to New York.
Right. Yeah.
No, and another thing too that I think may have been a factor too is that the British tabloids at that time were above and beyond any other tabloid system in the world.
So
and
intrusive.
when Madonna moved to London, it went into overdrive, and I think that her privacy was compromised. Correct?
Very, very. And they, and they were after her children, and that's partly why it all blew up with Rocco, because the paparazzi were taking pictures of him, like hanging out on the South Bank with skateboarders, and they just wouldn't leave her alone. And it's not just her; but they, that time, touch wood, has passed because of the internet, and because now artists and through social media can, to a certain extent, control how they control their own press to a degree. So it's taken a lot of that power away from the tabloids.
Right. Yeah. Lucy, do you know if she still owns that home? I saw it the last time I was in London, and I was surprised by how just, quotidian it looked,
Well, it's in a very expensive part of London.
Yes, across from a very posh hotel.
Yeah, so she bought two of those houses. They're actually incredibly expensive. So that's in Mayfair. Townhouses, really, actually, quite nice, very nice townhouses inside. I thought she'd sold them. Sorry, I don't know for sure, but there's that, and then there's that pub, the Punch Bowl, which she and Guy bought, which is in Mayfair, which is a very nice pub. Me and my husband have been and sat and had a drink in there, hoping that someone would walk in. No, but I think she sold those.
Yeah.
Well, she had to come up with some money to buy the Weeknd's house in LA, so maybe she unloaded those.
Release some equity. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Move some cash around.
Yeah, exactly.
Lucy, you said you had gone and seen Madam X, and I know you said you've seen earlier tours. Is there a tour that you've missed? Have you seen all of her tours?
I confess that because I had very young children at the time, I missed MDNA and I missed Rebel Heart. You know how sometimes you are in a very hectic phase when you've got small children, and it's hard to get babysitters and kind of keep up. I'm sad that I missed those, but then it more than made up for it to see Madam X and to be there, and to be so close to the stage. And there was a lovely atmosphere, actually, really lovely atmosphere. And I kind of felt that towards, by Rebel Heart, it had got a little impersonal and songwriting teams, rather than, I'm kind of a bit old school in that I think often artists' best work is when they are one-to-one with a producer in the studio. And I actually think that's how Madonna works best. And that she always found it slightly bewildering doing this songwriting by committee. That's not really her.
I would love if she would lock herself in a room with a producer and bang out another album in 2 weeks.
Yes. But I think that's why the tracks on Madam X, to me, that are the strongest are the ones she did with Me Away, because she kind of was doing that. But I think maybe younger artist producers and some of the hip hop producers she was working with, they prefer the more team building approach to it. And assembling beats in quite a different way. They just have quite different practices. And I think she likes to try that, but intrinsically, she's about traditional song, at its core. She loves innovative production, but she loves a song that swings and has a real tune. And that'll always be her priority.
Yeah. And one other thing. So I'm sure you're aware she's working on a biopic about her life.
Yeah.
What do you think she might choose to focus on as a plot for that movie? Because you've sort of already written a biography about her life. And do you think she might follow the same plot? Or
my sense is that she's focusing a lot on the early New York days. And up to Desperately Seeking Susan, because that is such a strong story, and it charts such an important pivotal time in terms of popular music, and also the part that New York played in that, the New York dance scene and danceteria, and that whole freestyle club thing, and Harlem voguing scene. I think that will be a really important part of it. With a biopic, the most successful ones are often ones that concentrate on a particular era rather than tell the entire story. So it wouldn't surprise me if they kind of stop around, maybe be interesting to see if they do her meeting Sean Penn, and getting married to Sean Penn, and if they do the sex book. You see, it's tricky, isn't it? Because there's so many phases. This is actually they should do the Crown. The Crown.
So many fans have said that they should scrap a movie and do a Crown style series about her, because it actually, the way her life is, you could do 80s, 90s. Yes. 2000, 2010, 2020. I mean, it just would 4 seasons right there.
Yeah, totally. I think it's quite interesting as well. I'd like to know your thoughts on the screenwriters that she's been working with, and I thought it's very interesting, that choice of Diablo Cody, who wrote Juno, and they worked on a script together, but now there's a new screenwriter she's working with, Erin Wilson, who's older, and it does make you wonder, you know, whether, not that it's a troubled project, I'm sure it isn't, but, you know, because there's so many different aspects that you can put into a film like that, you know, it must be hard to agree. And then it's got to go through Universal as well. Universal have got to say, yes, this film works, and we're going to put everything behind it.
Yeah, I think from what we've heard, the first draft that they turned in, Diablo, Cody, and Madonna, that first draft, Universal pushed back on it and wanted some changes. I also think that maybe Madonna and Diablo Cody didn't have the best working relationship. And
I did wonder that, because, you know, you look at the little videos that went up on, you know, on Twitter, and Diablo Cody just seemed to be really uncomfortable a lot of the time. Like, can we just get on with some work?
Yeah.
How she is, you know, you just have to go with it. You just have to go with it. Because my sense of, you know, talking to musicians and collaborators is, you know, Madonna does have a whole whimsical side to her.
Sure.
You just have to go with that. You can't fight that. You can't kind of control that. That's the whole point. You can't control that. So you have to sort of let that. You have to kind of go with it.
Yeah. Diablo Cody reminded me of, if you've ever been on like a booze cruise where, like, you know, it's a boat and you go like you go around the island for 3 hours and you're just stuck with a group of people drinking for those 3 hours. That's what Diablo Cody reminded me of in that, where it's like she realized after the boat left the port that she was now stuck on the boat for 3 hours with Madonna, and she had to like just stay with it. And it was like because sometimes the look of horror on her face was like, what have I gotten myself into with this?
Oh, can we get down to work? We've only done one page today. Can we do another page, please?
Yeah.
I always thought that the Madame X perfume had something to do with it, but that's just me. So, Lucy, I wanted to ask you about the other subjects that you've written about, Dusty Springfield and Annie Lennox, two very important female figures in the 20th century. You know, Dusty for, you know, half the middle, and, you know, Annie kind of took over the last part. In what ways do you think these artists, in addition to Madonna, have they've inspired and informed each other artistically? I know that you know, Madonna definitely has been informed by Dusty and Annie Lennox.
So I think with Dusty, again, you know, similar. They all work in kind of similar ways, really inspired by black music, blues, soul music, and bring that to the center of their work. And all those three artists have such an ear for melody and kind of delivering a powerful and passionate narrative about who they are. And each of them had a really strong visual identity as well. And with Madonna, it's clear, you know, with all the videos. And the same with Annie Lennox. You know, she would play with all these different personas, right from Sweet Dreams and the man in the suit to the angel, to pre that, when she was doing punk, and she was doing like a punk version of Dusty Springfield's "I Only Want to Be With You." So there's that side, and then with Dusty, she was a pioneer in terms of LGBT issues, and obviously being gay, and kind of finding ways to sneak in that gay sensibility in terms of, you know, maybe sometimes in interviews, or in the way that she, the kind of music that she sang, and kind of doing disco at a time when gay liberation was just emerging. So yes, in each of them in their own way has kind of pushed through boundaries and made quite powerful statements about, you know, what it is to be a woman at a particular time.
Lucy, do you happen to know the backstory of how Madonna came in to sing on Annie Lennox's single "Sing" and ended up taking over an entire verse?
I don't. It's interesting though, isn't it? Because Annie Lennox was not a big fan for quite a while. Because if you think about it, there's such different personalities. I mean, there's Annie Lennox is kind of quite ice blue Scots. She's not dour, but she's quite serious sometimes. And not frivolous. And has always rejected that big commercial pop world. But I think she has come round to understanding Madonna's power as a performer, as an artist. And I think they found common ground there because Annie has always come from that place as an artist, as a conceptual artist. And I think the thing is, as you get older, that's part of maturity, isn't it? It's realizing that you're both on the same side, really.
Sure. Yeah. Well, it's the same. I've read that about Tracy Thorne. I mean, from Everything But the Girl, Tracy Thorne had said, when Madonna had first come out on the scene, she totally disregarded her and didn't look at her as a legitimate artist. And then, 30 years later, we sort of came to and realized, oh my God, why haven't I been paying attention to what she's been doing just as a female in the music industry?
That's right. And funny enough, you should mention Tracy Thorne. She was sat next to me when we went to see Madam X.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, so that was really nice. We had quite a laugh about that. We both had very glittery tops on, and we hadn't planned that before we went. And we said, it's obviously something about Madonna that we felt inspired to wear glittery tops.
I love that.
Hey, you got a little sparkle never hurts at a Madonna show.
No, exactly. Yeah.
Lucy, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention Shebop, which is, started out as a book and it became, God, for lack of a better word, like a movement. So it started out as a book. And I'm only guessing that, because you came from, a punk music background with your super, super famous bands, Catholic Girls. So tell us a little bit about the Shebop Project, the definitive history of women in pop, rock, and soul, and its journey from book to exhibit at the National Portrait Gallery in London to a Radio 2 documentary series, and there's a sequel. What have you?
Yeah. So basically, in the early 90s, it even goes back to the 80s when I was working for NME, New Musical Express, and it was my first job as a music writer. And I felt that women weren't getting the attention they deserved, and they weren't. So I was on a one-woman mission, and I just thought, well, I'm going to interview female artists as often as I can to plug that gap. And then after a while, I'd built up quite a lot of interviews. And I happened to meet an editor from Penguin who said, why don't you put all that in a book and write a history of women in popular music? And I thought, it hasn't been done, so let's do it. So that was the early 90s, and that's what set me off on that journey of tracking people down, in the same way that I have with the other books is, again, it's those conversations, those one-to-one conversations. And what I feel proud of about Shebop is it's now in its 4th edition. And, like we were saying about Madonna like an icon, there will probably be one when she's 70. And with Shebop, I keep thinking, right, that really is the last one. But then stuff happens, and there's more interesting stuff that happens. And so we had our Silver Jubilee version that came out last September with an extra chapter. And it is like she has a life of her own. I now talk about her as she. And she is like a repository of oral history. She's all these women that have contributed to it. So women that have since passed away, like Nina Simone or Eartha Kitt or Miriam Makeba, women whose stories, yes, they've been recorded elsewhere, but not in the way the conversation that I had with them in the whole context of how women in pop music kind of developed their sound and their style, and how they saw themselves within that, their own contribution to that. That's what was fascinating to me. But not just the big names, it was also the women behind the scenes early in A&R women or early women in production, because I think that's just as important to look at the infrastructure and look at what's behind that as well.
Oh, brilliant. Stefan, I think it might be time for my favorite part of the show.
I think you are correct, Tony. I think it's time to give Lucy O'Brien a little bit of the lightning round. So, Lucy, for all of our guests here on the show, we always ask a quick rapid fire. It's just off the top of your head answers wherever you're at in your Madonna journey today. Favorite Madonna song?
Mad Girl.
Oh, nice. Good call. Favorite Madonna music video?
Frozen. Always Frozen.
Favorite Madonna tour?
Blonde Ambition. Blonde Ambition.
Yeah, you can't go wrong.
Yeah.
Well, also on that sub question, Blonde Ambition, are you ponytail or curls?
Oh, ponytail.
Yeah. Super iconic. Favorite Madonna movie?
Desperately Seeking Susan. Yeah.
Favorite Madonna look, and that could be from a photo shoot, a music video, a tour, in person.
The Gautier pink corset.
Oh,
for the Blonde Ambition tour.
Yeah.
And if you had Madonna in the room with you right now, what's a question you would ask her?
Oh gosh. Oh, that's a really good question. I would say, how's it going with the biopic?
Yeah.
Sorry to be so mundane, but I'd be like, wow, how are you finding it? What stories do you want to tell? And and how do you feel your life should be represented? It's a difficult one, but it's kind of like writing a memoir, isn't it? But what you're doing is you're making a film, and it's a film memoir. So that's I'd start giving her advice, and I'd say, yeah, you should think of it like an art film,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Lucy, we are so happy that you joined us today. We loved this conversation. It just went in so many directions, and I'm super grateful for your presence.
Yeah, I feel like we could keep talking for ages, but I know you got some writing to do. I know you've got a book to write.
And when you get closer to publication for Karen Carpenter, please come back and we'll talk about that.
Would love to.
I would love to. But yeah, let everyone know where they can find you on social media, and also where your books can be purchased.
Yeah, so all my books, Amazon is great. You can also click into my website, lucyobrien.co.uk. I'm on Lucy O'Brien 61 on Instagram and at Lucy O'Brien tweet on Twitter.
Perfect. And you can find us, meaning me and Stefan, on Instagram and Twitter at MLVC Podcast. Please give us a 5-star review, like and subscribe to the podcast, and share it with your fellow Madonna fan friends. You can also donate to the podcast on Venmo at MLVC Podcast, as well as our patron page, patron.podbean.com/MLVC Podcast. So until next
time.
Tony,
you say that so well, Tony. It just rolls right off your tongue. So eloquent.
Well, I'll let you guys say goodbye, but until next time, get up and do your thing.
Thanks, Lucy. Thanks for joining us.
Bye.